Okay, we're recording, we're live, and I'm excited to have Stephanie Lott with us. I first met Stephanie when I was part of Faculty Senate, and she came and after she was hired at K-State, gave a great presentation to our group. But today we're really going to kind of focus more on how we tailor this to graduate students. So with that, Stephanie, would you explain just to give us an introduction who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So my name is Stephanie Lott. I'm the new director of the Office of Institutional Equity and the Title IX coordinator for the university. I'm also the affirmative action coordinator for the institution. I came to K-State in April of this year, and previous to K-State, I worked at Arkansas State University for 6 years. And previous to that, I spent a few years at Western Kentucky University. So I've been working in the non-discrimination compliance field for a little over 11 years now. And I really like being K-State. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, we're happy you're part of the K-State family. I've always liked, that's why I moved back to this place. So, there's a lot of challenges that we need to be aware of. And I would like to just explain what all we should be looking out for that your office would manage or assist with.
Yeah. So in general, anything that's under the university policy PPM 3010 is overseen by our office. So anything in that policy, when you think about OIE, you should immediately think about PPM 3010. And that policy really talks about non-discrimination in two different capacities. You have non-discrimination that applies to things like Title VI and Title VII, which is discrimination based on a person belonging to a protected class, like your race, religion, ethnicity, disability, things like that. And Title VI, when we talk about that, talks about discrimination in your education programs or activities. Title VII focuses on discrimination in your employment capacity. So PPM 3010 split into two parts. You have the Title VI, Title VII stuff over here. And then the other side, you have Title IX. Title IX focuses on gender equity. And so non-discrimination in your education programs and activities related to gender or your sex. When we talk about Title IX, some of the challenges for that, of course, is the ever-changing landscape of that. Generally, we've decided to politicize Title IX. So every time we get a new president, we get new Title IX regulations. And that can be really challenging because as soon as you feel like you have it figured out, it changes. We have to understand that, we have to implement it, and then we'll help you, understand it and talk through it. But it's really hard to be on the other side of that, not being a professional in the field, and try to keep up with that too. The Title VI, Title VII stuff, it doesn't change as often. It's just typically more cumbersome because as our culture and our politics change, there are certain types of incidents that flare up more often than others that we have to address. And so that can be a challenge, I think, in how to navigate civil discourse and disagreements can often be pretty challenging for us and for other folks too.
Well, that's a great introduction to kind of a lot of the challenges we have. And I think with this podcast, we'll put in the link to PPM 3010 because the policy and procedure manual, which is PPM, is very broad, right? It's very large. But I think there's parts of the PPM that we really do need to be aware of, particularly how they would relate to how we treat other people. So how has COVID changed some of the challenges that you're seeing and that students see?
So that's a great question. It has a lot of challenges for students, I think, in other areas. And what we do, it hasn't really changed a lot for us. And so that's a good thing. No matter where you are as a student or faculty member or staff member, wherever, whether you're remote, you're on campus, because there's a hybrid sort of for faculty, staff, and students right now. Our process doesn't change for you. You could always report the same things you could remotely as you can when you're on campus in person. So our process didn't really change. The only thing is when we interview folks, we're in a setting like this versus in person. But other than that, it doesn't change anything. We're still able to provide the same types of resources that we were giving before, which is a good thing. I think that for students and faculty and staff, everything else changed except this. Our process really stayed the same. So we were happy to see that. And I think it made things just a little bit easier to have some familiarity for folks who needed to report to us or need to utilize our services.
Okay. And so, students, faculty, staff, we're constantly engaging with other people. And if we hear something from a student, a peer, et cetera, that is very confidential or troubling in nature, and you might give some examples of what would be troubling or confidential, what's the process that they should take? What, if you're a GTA or a GRA and a client comes in that you're part of a research study with, or a student in your class that you're GTA and tells you something that you believe requires actions or falls under some sort of confidential status, what do they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the challenges for folks who are not trained in this work, and we're just asking you to regurgitate information to us, is when you hear a report from somebody, it is very common for two things to happen. One, you to try to filter out, is that sexual harassment? Is it not sexual harassment? It really challenges your own lens and definition of that. And that's a concern that we'll talk a little bit about in a second. The other part that I think is a challenge is people focus too much on whether or not they believe whatever they just heard from somebody, which has nothing to do with whether or not you should report it to us. So let's start with the first one. When you hear something concerning from another party that you think even mildly could fall underneath discrimination related to Title VI, Title VII, so those protected classes we talked about, or Title IX, sexual harassment, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking, you have an obligation to regurgitate that information to me and me only. Your only obligation is to report it to the Title IX coordinator. You have no other obligation to tell anybody else, and you shouldn't, to protect that confidentiality like we talked about, which is a little bit different for folks because I think we're always taught to manage up, and especially as a GTA, you're probably thinking I need to tell this faculty member that I work with, that I report to. You shouldn't do that because you may not know if they're involved. You may not know if this person who's confided this in you wants them to know, right? And so there's nothing that faculty member can do to respond to that concern that we cannot do. And so we always encourage folks, don't report up and tell another person, tell that immediately to us. If we ever need to involve your faculty member, we will, right? But when you're hearing this information from somebody, it can be really common for you to think about, what do I need to do to make me feel better about their situation? And it's not about us, it's about them. So I always say, rely on this person. If they say, I'd like to talk to university police, you should call university police. If they say, I'd like to report this to OIE, you should help them do that. If they say, I don't want to tell OIE or anybody else, but they've already told you and you're a responsible employee, you're stuck. That's a really tricky spot to be in. You still have to report it to us, but this person has options. We're going to email them and invite them to talk to us and give them resources. They can ignore my email and delete it all day, and they never have to speak to us, but you still have the obligation to report. So any kind of trigger words you hear, I was uncomfortable, I was being followed, I feel I've been treated differently, I feel I've experienced a different environment than other folks. Anytime you hear things like that or phrases like that, that should trigger something in you that says, I should probably report this and give somebody else an opportunity to review it. The second part of that we talked about was whether or not you believe what somebody said to you is the least important fact in the room. It has nothing to do with whether or not you believe anything you've heard, and everything to do with my obligation to regurgitate this information and report it to OIE. And as long as you're doing that, there's no such thing as a bad report. We're never going to contact you and say, you really shouldn't have sent that to us. We'll take every report we get and we'll review it and we'll respond accordingly. And so I just don't want folks to self-filter too much. Here, listen to this person in front of you, give them resources and report appropriately. And then we take the rest off your plate and you should continue doing exactly what you were hired to do.
So in other words, they shouldn't try to interpret what the individual is saying on whether it's factual or not factual.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not something you should ever spend time on. I don't need you to play investigator. It's not even about, do you feel comfortable being an investigator and asking additional questions? We don't want you to. I don't want you to dive deeper so that you can try to give us a good report. It's really well intentioned and it happens, but it has the opposite effect of what people think. Often you ask probably the wrong questions and things that aren't really relevant to what it would mean to help this person. I always say there's only two questions you really need to ask somebody who's reporting something to you. One, do you feel safe? Two, if you don't feel safe, what can I do to help you feel safe?
Gotcha.
Right? And that's about giving resources and being a liaison to those resources for them and then reporting appropriately. That's it. We take care of all the rest.
Perfect. So in other words, or in essence, we're not equipped with the tools to be investigators into this, and we shouldn't try to be, because we
Precisely.
do more damage than good.
Yeah, precisely. You know, faculty are brilliant, student staff are brilliant, GTAs, everybody was hired to do exactly what their role is. I would never try to be a faculty member because I would fail miserably, if we're being honest. I'm in this role because this is where I function best. And so when we don't want you to be anything other than what you were hired to do. Help this person, give them resources, report back to us. We take the rest off the plate.
Perfect. So far we've dealt with students, graduate students, faculty, staff, where someone would come and tell them something.
Yeah.
Now, if you're teaching in a classroom or laboratory that has, say, 10 or 15 students in it, and you overhear a student talking to another student, so you didn't hear it directly, but you did overhear it, and you might think, well, did I just hear this? What are they to do if they overhear something? They're not told, again, they just heard it.
That's a great question. So your obligation as a responsible employee to give that back to us is based on whether or not you were directly told or you observed it. So the same things still apply. If you observe either behavior or you overhear a conversation that you think was equally as concerning as if it were said directly to you, you should still report that just the same. What I always tell people is I always encourage you to be mindful of the conversations in which you are actively or passively participating in. Because if you and I are having a conversation one-on-one, and let's say I'm telling a sexually harassing joke to you, I think it's funny, you think it's funny, this third person over here who's not part of our conversation overhears it, and they feel like we've created a hostile environment for them, and they feel offended by that behavior and it's concerning to them. They can report it, and you and I would still be held accountable for that behavior, even if this person were not part of our conversation. So it works the same way in retrospect. If you're just a reporter, if you overhear it, it doesn't have to be concerning to you if you think it's concerning behavior in general. You may not personally think that it's a bad joke, but you understand that the placement of the joke in the classroom and the education setting is not appropriate in a Title IX context. You should report that. Similarly, if it were Title VI or Title VII related to discrimination in any other protected class, we should report that. Not everything that we get is a full investigation. We do a lot of informal conversations in education and training. Our job is to educate folks and to try to prevent the recurrence of some of these activities and behaviors. Very, very rarely do we need to go into a full formal investigation to resolve those things.
That's great.
Yeah.
So that really ends our little introduction to the content. There's going to be a pre-recorded presentation from you with a lot of the information and a lot of the resources that I think is critical for incoming students to understand. Just based on what you've said today about the PPM, about the confidentiality, the reporting structures, etc. I think this is a resource that students need to be very aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, Stephanie, I really appreciate you spending time with us, me today, but it's going to be shared with our graduate students in the college, and keep on doing the good work that you do. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Brett.